All right. So as Jane said, I'm Michael Flierl. Let's see if I can share properly. And Jane, can you confirm that you can see everything? Great. Thank you so much. So Michael Flierl, I'm associate professor and student learning librarian at Ohio State University Libraries. I've done a lot of different work in AI. Oh boy, where to start? I've consulted for the Department of Defense on AI. I've been involved in local AI committees, both for university libraries and for the university. I've presented at the European Conference on Information Literacy on AI, and our new faculty orientation here, University Senate. So I'm someone who's maybe more of a practitioner than AI computer scientist, but my goal here today is to kind of talk about AI from an information literacy lens and to hopefully be provocative. I'm not here to really provide concrete answers, but instead to hopefully provoke new ways of thinking and considering and experiencing AI. So that's kind of my goal today, is to provoke new thought, not to give you like hard and fast and easy answers. Also, please do put questions in the Q&A. I am going to allot some time along throughout the presentation for different to make sure that everyone gets a chance to have at least some questions heard. Okay, so without further ado, this presentation is going to have kind of three parts. One is a brief overview. This will be the quickest section of what is AI currently capable of. I'm not saying generative AI, I'm saying AI, although most of the advancements recently have been in this generative AI space with transformer architectures. Second is, what is the relationship between AI literacy and information literacy? I'm going to try to sidestep semantic arguments. AI literacy? Is it information literacy? Is it something distinct? We're going to sidestep that, but really kind of interrogate what should the relationship between the two be. And then lastly is kind of a more normative or ethical question of like, what is our responsibilities as information professionals? Or put differently, what is the scope around AI with which we should be concerned? Should it solely be with, say, undergraduate or graduate students and researchers? Should it be just in the ivory tower? Or given this, large economic and social and political effects AI already is having, should we broaden that scope of information literacy, AI literacy, to be concerned about that? So those are kind of three fundamental areas that we're going to break down this talk by. And again, please, I want this to be interactive. So if you do have a pressing question, put in the Q&A. I'll ask Jane to help me. If there's some ones that kind of keep on popping up, or if there's a really relevant one, I'd love to engage with you that way. Okay, so this is the brief interview in hopefully like 5 to 10 minutes. This is from a few months ago. They put GPT-2, so ChatGPT-3 is the one that made the big splash in November a couple of years ago. ChatGPT-2 now has been made so small it could actually be run, it actually put into an Excel spreadsheet. It could run through Excel. So what's important about this is that these models are becoming smaller. That's important to note for a variety of reasons we'll discuss. Secondly, we're starting to run out of data to create these models. So to create generative AI models specifically requires a lot of data to train these models on. And there's experts saying in the next couple of years, we're going to run out of it. And that's after scraping every publicly available, I'll use that term, we'll discuss that later, all the publicly available information, text, that's podcasts, that's YouTube videos, et cetera, that well of data will be drying up in a couple of years, maybe even faster, who knows? So the question then becomes, how do we progress generative AI models without all this human-generated content? Well, the answer is you get AIs to create data to train different AIs. It's called synthetic data. It's already being used. I could show you today even a model that uses this that you can interact with without even an account. You can even do this yourself. So if you really want to see what this looks like, there's GitHub repositories that even have entire setups such that even a layperson would be able to download a few files and run an LLM locally and even create their own synthetic data to train it on. It's actually not that difficult. If you don't have a good GPU, it might take a while. The other part of this too is that AIs now, there's the second part of the fine-tuning process for generative AIs. It requires a lot of human feedback. If you've ever heard RLHF, reinforcement learning with human feedback. So all this data that's been used, say like the entire internet, has been used to kind of train these models on what English or what a sentence looks like or what paragraphs look like. But this also requires a lot of what question answer pairs. So ChatGPT 3, I think, required 100,000, give or take, 100,000 high quality question answer pairs. And that's how you train it to be kind of a chatbot. So it could fill in the blank, it could answer complete sentences or create complete sentences by being trained on the internet. But how do you get it to interact with humans that want information from it? Well, you provide it examples. Again, this is very costly and expensive and time intensive. So the answer is you get AIs to to judge whether the output of an AI is accurate or not, and then you change the neural network accordingly. It's not perfect, it's not nearly as good as humans, but this is the economics of generative AI is pushing us in this direction. You also have to think of AI as multimodal. So that is as incorporating text, image, audio. So this is an AI generated video. This is from Sora. I still kind of can't believe that this is AI generated with things like text or hands. Sometimes you can tell. There's actually a little test recently on the New York Times about this, but this I still can't believe is AI generated, to be totally honest with you. I mean, all the feathers, the plumage, the eyes, it all looks very realistic. How OpenAI created this model is a whole other story that we will get into, and what data was used to train on. Okay, and then also we have to think of AI as coming for our phone. So it's getting smaller, therefore it could be become run more locally on our phones. And so this is a New York Times article from just a few days ago that described Apple, Microsoft trying to find AI applications for things for your laptop or for your phone. So for instance, taking a screenshot every 5 seconds of your laptop such that, and it will kind of store that information in a vector database, kind of similar to how generative AI models store their information, such that you can query it and say, remember that meeting from 2.5 weeks ago when John was sipping on a cup of coffee and it said world's best boss? And he said something and I can't remember, and I really want to find out what that is. The whole purpose of that would be, the whole purpose of taking screenshots would be to be able to answer that question. Another thing that Android wants, Google is interested in, is in listening into your phone calls in real time to try to detect certain words or phrases that are being discussed, and ideally to notify you of when a scam is happening. Now, they're all saying, look, this information, this data will only be go to the cloud in certain ways, and there's encryption standards, et cetera, but we also know that there's been multiple instances of large companies like Microsoft, Google, Apple, blatantly lying about how they're protecting user data. Okay, and then also, first, I should point out the dates of these 2014, 2016, these citations. So this is before the generative AI era. That's why I kind of want to talk about AI a little bit more broadly, is that AI systems were already being used for hiring decisions. There's AI applications that are reviewing, tens of thousands of resumes at a time. Amazon famously tried this and then found that its AI preferred lacrosse players who went to schools like Duke. And it tends like the resume AI that it built was trained off of data for privileged individuals, and that's what it prioritized, and it deprioritized you if you were a woman. Loan applications to help with prison length determinations. I think the reasoning behind this is to be more objective than a subjective judge, but this is already going on before generative AI. I think that's integral to note. And as of yesterday, Hugging Face is like a GitHub repository for AI models. As of yesterday, there was 732,914. I just checked this morning, there's about 2,000 more added. So there's a lot of open source models that you can play around with yourself. Most of these are from derivatives of really powerful open source AI models like Meta's Llama. If you've heard of Llama 2, Llama 3 just came out and it's pretty good. These are all open source, not like their training data isn't released, but their weights are released. I can get into technical details if you want there too, but it's important to note there's hundreds of thousands of these models that are already easily available that anyone could download and run locally. And then lastly, this is just bizarre. This is from a New York Times, a couple, in the past week. Ilya Sustaver, he has some great YouTube videos, by the way. He left OpenAI and then recently created his own AI programmer, or is raising funds to create his own AI company. And the goal is to create a safe superintelligence. So an AI that is smarter than the average human at basically any task requiring a keyboard and mouse. Why we have that goal? What are the problems of that? Will the superintelligence be aligned with our values and goals? Is a big question. It's called the alignment problem. How do you contain such a superintelligence is an open question. And there's a lot of researchers saying that there's a lot of potential issues or safety problems with this. Okay, so I'm going to conclude here and then we'll stop for questions for a few minutes. But the conclusion after all of this, and a lot of these you'll see are newspaper clippings from the past week, is that the information literacy landscape has fundamentally changed. This is kind of like the year or two after the publicly available internet. This is kind of after smartphones. We live in a different information literacy world. The data, the research, the theory that a lot of our existing information literacy theories and practices are based off of were before generative AI or before advanced algorithms. And so we need to adapt or change, and that'll be the second part of the presentation. But for now, I will stop. And Jane, can you help me? Are there any questions in the Q&A?
Yes, so we have one question so far. Do you have any favorite community digital spaces where good, fruitful conversations about AI and higher ed or libraries are taking place?
That's a great question. AI for libraries, archives, and museums. AI for LAM has a Slack. You can Google AI for number 4, LAM, all caps. That has a Slack and a website, but I think it's mostly active on Slack. They have an annual conference I attended last year in Vancouver. This upcoming one is in Australia. So that's a great space. Full disclosure, I'm actually currently creating kind of an AI community of practice that will be shared in the months to come with colleagues from Carnegie Mellon and Purdue and OSU. So I'm seeing that need. There is also an ALA machine learning AI interest group too. That I'm not as conversant in. I just joined recently because I just found it. So those would be two examples.
Thank you, Michael. And so one more question, I think, and this is a response to this slide specifically, I think. So should we be using the term information literacy, meta literacy, something else?
Yeah, I just think we need to, I don't know. That's a really interesting question. I don't know. I don't know. I'm nervous about this devolving into semantics inside baseball. I don't typically, the phrase information literacy means a lot to information professionals, to academic librarians, but it tends not to mean very much to people outside. And I think in particular with AI, it kind of takes a village, or so I would argue, to create safe, reliable, transparent, explainable, human-centered AI. And I think at the end, you'll see, I'm going to argue that we should be a part of the conversation because we actually have expertise to bring to bear. So the nomenclature can kind of get in the way as far as I'm concerned. I'd prefer, I don't know. I think as long as we're consistent, yeah, that's an open question. I really don't have a good answer because I know some people who will say AI literacy is encompassed by information literacy. Other folks that would argue, no, this is fundamentally different. Yeah, I really don't have a good answer, I'm afraid.
Do you have time for one more question here?
Yes, we'll do one more.
Okay, so question is, I'm perplexed by your characterization of the data well running dry in a few years. Aren't we human generating data continuously? I can see initial scraping efforts slowing down and merely keeping up with new info, but running dry. Sorry for being dense, but need more explanation.
Yeah, that's a fair question. Basically, these companies have scraped information, say Wikipedia. Wikipedia has been around for a while now, and it took years to generate that much text and image. And yes, they would be able to update, every few months, take in the new amount of content generated in that previous few months. But it would pale in comparison to the years it took to create all those YouTube videos, podcasts, texts. So by it running dry, it means the kind of wellspring of data that was used in conjunction with this new neural network architecture, that kind of kickstarted this whole process. There is no big glut of data comparable to that. So that's the problem. Yes, there'll be a trickle of data, but we need a lot more data the way these generative AI large language models work. The current generation, at least, requires huge swaths of data. So even updating it every few months from what's new on the internet isn't going to be sufficient to make like ChatGPT 5. So, okay, we'll have plenty of time for questions. Also, my email's all over this presentation. I'm happy to talk about this. I've done a lot of different workshops and presentations with different entities, like a bunch of different health sciences librarians, for instance. Love to talk further offline, email, what have you. Okay, so my contention again is the information landscape has fundamentally changed, and so we need to investigate what is this, given this fact, or what I would argue, what is the relationship now between AI literacy and information literacy? Maybe this provides some clarity on that question regarding like, what do we call this? So November 2023, this article came out. It was actually, I thought, really well done, describing ChatGPT in these kind of plainly evident but sophisticated ways and how it relates to the framework for information literacy. That being said, I also think strategically, big picture, so tactically or on a small scale, I think this was a really thoughtful and timely piece that's kind of necessary to advance the conversation. In a bigger picture, longer term view, I think it's fundamentally an error to think of AI in terms of information literacy. In fact, I argue we should do the opposite. We need to rethink information literacy in terms of what AI can now do, now what it offers. Imagine the internet is 80% generated by AI. What does that look like, and what does information literacy become in that world? So IL should adapt to AI, not the other way around. That's kind of the big takeaway for the second part, or that's my provocative thought that I'm going to ask you all to consider, and hopefully it challenges you. I guess my argument then is AI is so transformative, culturally, educationally, socially, in terms of warfare even, that we need to rethink information literacy theories and practices. It's so big, it's so transformative, it's so fun, such a qualitatively different information world we now live in. Information literacy practices theory needs to be rethought, reconsidered. I'm not here to give answers that today, but I am going to try to provoke questions for us to kind of start that conversation. So one example of this is a paper, again, this just published this past week, June 17th. If you want to, like, the biggest evangelist, I think, for generative AI for education, it's Ethan Mollick, hands down. He's got a great Substack, highly recommend it. This paper this past week, he described kind of, a new way to teach using generative AI systems. And the top kind of column or row there, you'll see mentor agent, investor agent, evaluator agent. And that's all different AIs, different GPTs he's created for specific purposes. So I think kind of the future of AI in the classroom isn't like a big singular interface where you're working on one big LLM, but in fact, students are working with many smaller, more focused AIs. And the bottom, you'll see it's inputting data from preferences from the learners, from what the learner prefers, This is all for like an entrepreneur class. So like the pitch, the transcript of it interacting with the students, etc. And then it aggregates that and gives information to the instructor about each individual student and an aggregate for the whole class. So I think even it could be a failure of the imagination to think of information literacy and education in an AI as students just interacting with one AI and critiquing that output. It's going to become more sophisticated. It's going to become more complex as the number of AIs, as it becomes cheaper and easier and more local and smaller. Okay. Also, we need to consider this. I'm not original in this, but I think it's accurate that society's first interaction with advanced artificial intelligence technology was social media. And just to give you a heads up, we are going to talk about some sensitive topics next. Fair warning. The research on this is not solid. I think there's ways in which people have thrown methodological flaws or considerations into this research. But at the same time, I also think it's parsimonious. It makes the most sense with the simplest explanation for why we see significant mental health problems for teen girls right when social media was taking off, right in the countries of advanced economies, English-speaking worlds that were using social media the most. So round one, the outcome is we had terrible mental health outcomes for a significant portion of our population. And what did we get in return? This, again, just this past week, New York Times described various lawsuits by states' attorneys general. And you'll see snippets of email in there in which Meta employees are saying, hey, there might be an issue. There's a filter on Instagram, for instance, that mimics the nip-tuck procedure to make people's faces appear more attractive or mimics this type of cosmetic procedure. This might be an issue for young, impressionable women. And Mark Zuckerberg says, I don't see the data or I don't see evidence of that. Let's keep that going. That's not a problem. This is, he didn't say it, but it's clear there's an economic incentive for them to keep those filters because teen engagement is a big driver for growth for them, for Meta. This is a longer piece from May this past year in The Atlantic, but we also have to consider I guess, how embedded not only AI, but algorithms are going to be, and they already are in dating apps. There's talk, I don't know if this actually exists yet, but an AI kind of like double, such that you create this profile and then you create this chatbot AI type of thing that tries to take into account your preferences. And that AI can talk to other digital doubles and basically kind of serve as a matchmaker and then go back to you and say, hey, I think person X or person Y would be a good fit for you. I mean, it's kind of bonkers. I mean, not just hiring decisions, dating, writing, music. I created my own music using generative AI recently as an experiment. I'm sure a lot of us have saw the recipe recommendations for, what was it, rocks or something poisonous? I forget which, but Google put the generative AI summary on some search results, and then it gave suggested using toxic chemicals in recipes, I think, and then they shut it off. But I think all the economic incentive for companies to embed generative AI technology more, to be more opaque about it, and that could elicit a number of issues, including cultivating incompetence and capacity under this guise of empowerment. Let AI do the work for you. Now, I don't want to sound like a Luddite. I also don't want to sound like, Socrates bemoaned writing because he thought we'd be dumber. It's not nearly as dynamic as memorizing things and engaging in dialogue. So I don't want to go that far, but I do think it's a question that we want to answer, or we want our students to answer, researchers. How much power do we want to give to this AI, and how empowering is it? And so to kind of start to wrap up this section, so AI literacy is going to take, I think, some technical knowledge. You need to understand in some level, this tokenization process. How do you convert an AI? Computers work in numbers, we interact in language. how do the words translate into numbers, translate back to words? How does that process happen? That's important to understand from an AI literacy perspective, I would argue, because if you understand that process, you understand why a generative AI program that costs billions of dollars to create might falter on a basic math question that your $1 calculator can answer. It would answer why Google search is fundamentally different from ChatGPT providing an answer to your question. It's not going out and finding the information, it's creating snippets, tokens of text at a time that it thinks will answer whatever it is you're seeking. So those are fundamentally different technologies. This is fundamentally, it's important to understand that if you're using biased data, that you're going to get biased outputs, for instance, too. So I think AI literacy requires some version of technical knowledge. I think there's no way getting around it, just like some technical knowledge to understand how like search engine optimization works in order to utilize like Google more effectively. I also think it requires metacognition. I don't think there's a way around this. Again, I don't think there's a way to avoid saying that we need students and researchers to be aware of how they're using AI and to be able to justify why AI is useful in situation X, but then why they didn't use it for Y. So a lot of time, I'm seeing a lot more use of what are called AI audit trails of students saying, of instructors saying, go ahead, use AI, but you have to give me your prompt, you have to give me the model's output, and you have to describe how you changed or how you interacted with the AI, why you did what you did, and then what was the results? What did you use, what didn't you use, and why? For me, that's all an exercise, a useful exercise in metacognition. And I don't think that strays too far away from existing information literacy theory or practices. In fact, I think just becomes all the more important. We also need ethics. We need to ask questions. We'll get into this shortly, but where do you get the data? Could this data be biased? Is there an issue with giving notions of objectivity or superintelligence to these machines in which they're not explainable? You don't understand. Even the best computer scientists in the world will say, we understand the math, how the math works out. We understand mathematically how large language models work. What we don't understand is how the models are using those math operations in order to give us the outputs. They fundamentally don't understand how it works. They know that it works in certain ways because they've thrown enough data at it, but there's continuously ways to trip up these programs. And it's pretty straightforward. It doesn't require an advanced CS degree to do that. And so we need AI ethics, I think, will require sophistication in describing different ethical aspects of AI, and which requires technical knowledge, which requires metacognition. But I think this is just the beginning. I think there's so much room to explore here, and that's what we need to do as a profession. That's kind of, again, what I'm going to hammer on is there's no simple solution here. AI technology continues to adapt and evolve and grow. I mean, half my slides are from things in the past 3 months. Who knows what's going to happen in the next year? It's possible that AI, it kind of runs out of useful data and large language models will largely plateau. You saw that at the recent ChatGPT kind of event where they described a lot of new features, but they didn't improve the base functionality, accuracy, reliability of ChatGPT 4. So I think this gets us started, but I think a lot more discussion and dialogue and investigation and research needs to go in to really round out this concept. I think internally, we need to debate and discuss what this looks like. So so then that requires us to formulate the most important questions. So if we can create a lot of mediocre questions and attempt to answer them, but if we're answering a mediocre or average or really less than interesting or useful question, then that's not going to be useful for us. So we need to discuss what are the most important questions. For instance, is the current social media environment, is that a result of an information literacy failure by IL professionals? And I'll throw myself under that bus. Were we too concerned with the 38% of people in the United States who graduate with an undergraduate degree, a minority of the US population? Should we have tried to get outside of that? I can see an argument against that, saying that's outside of our remit, that's outside of what we were hired to do. I don't know, but that means something. If you consider information literacy that a major failure, given the social media outcomes that we've seen, or that seem to be plausible as a result of social media, if you take that track, then we should all be concerned about AI being used in warfare or to create the next generation. What's the interaction? What is our responsibility for to educate the next generation of democratic citizens? Is that within our scope or not? That's a very big question. And it leads to two very different worlds. If you think, no, that's outside of our scope, that's outside of what information literacy do versus not outside of it. And again, I don't have a concrete answer here. I'm saying I think questions like these are things that we need to consider in order to become more informed, for discussion about AI literacy. Another part, what if we can't trust the internet? What if in a couple years, and some experts are saying this, the vast majority of the content online will be AI generated? What kind of world would that be? What if we can't trust the internet to go find reliable information about political candidates or basic healthcare questions? Again, that's a fundamentally different world, and that's something we need to tackle, I think, if we're going to talk about AI literacy. Also, we need to consider, what if we can't solve some of these problems? What does it look like if misinformation is rampant? What does information literacy look like in a world in which it's difficult to discern accurate information on political topics? Let's say there's a presidential election coming up soon. What if you can't find reliable information very easily? What if it's out there, but it's surrounded by misinformation? What if all the economic incentives are for companies to just create content or to modify existing content, recreate it, throw some ads on it, and make money that way? What does information literacy look in that type of world? And I think we have to consider this question. We have to consider like failure states and what information literacy looks like in that failure state, because it's genuinely plausible in what could happen with AI. We don't know what's going to happen. Okay, so that's the second section. Really, it's what are the fundamental questions that we need to tackle? We need to reconceptualize information literacy in light of AI, but the question then becomes, what are the most pressing questions? We'll only have so many resources and time to tackle these. What are those questions? What should we be debating and discussing? What should we be spilling ink on in order to advance information literacy theory in this new information landscape? Again, I don't know, but I think we need to start that discussion now. If we start this in a couple of years' time, it's going to be too late. The cake will be baked. So I'll stop there, and Jane, maybe you can help me with some Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. So this may be one that you're planning to answer coming up, but so many argue that engaging in the use of AI is very imprudent given the climate crisis and the ethics of using a system trained on copyrighted material. Given this, how should librarians and educators proceed? Boycott all use of LLMs, call for a tech pause?
Great question. Great question. I don't know. So yes, it's energy intensive. If you like create an image on a Midjourney or Copilot or OpenAI, which I think uses Midjourney, that's about the same energy use of charging your cell phone from 0 to 100. That's substantial. The energy requirements now, I think, for LLMs in particular, like the entire country of Ireland, and they expect that to grow to like the entire power output of Australia required to train these models. That's a lot of electricity. At the same time, you can argue we're using AI and supercomputers, which are also energy intensive, to help solve the climate crisis. So I don't know. I mean, flying is terrible for the environment. I don't know. I think it's a legitimate question, to be frank, though. And I think it's something that we need to grapple with. And I think, honestly, if we are going to go there and argue that there are serious ethical implications, academic librarians are great. Coming from a great place because we already have existing values. We already have existing professional standards around this. Also, yes, there's a lot more information now coming out about the use of copyrighted material. I will go into that. But yes, it's blatant copyright infringement. I don't think there's any way to go around the fact that generative AI exists due to either weak copyright protections or weak copyright enforcement mechanisms. So yeah, I think that's a wholly legitimate argument. And I think there needs to be a debate about just that, because there's already discussion. There's already people saying, look, this is going to happen, so we should just be doing it. Look, it's going to look good for the university if the libraries are shown using this technology in a productive way for, I know cataloging or metadata services are a big use case for this in libraries. So yeah, I think that's great. At the same time, though, it's possible that we can train our own models. That's another element to this too, but I'll stop there. But fantastic question.
Great, yeah. So another question, sort of thinking about how libraries might be using AI. So if AI models require more data, will libraries see funding for digitization efforts, from corporations who want more text to train their AIs and are willing to use older content?
Oh yeah, I think that's the next logical step. And this was actually talked about the AI for LAM conference this past year, was like what we hold, what's behind our paywalls is the next big treasure in terms of information data that's already highly processed, highly vetted information that they want to get their hands on. And what's come out recently with OpenAI is that they've blatantly infringed on copyright and took information. There's even evidence of them trying to look up how much would it cost to buy these publishers so that we can get all this data from the books that they use in order to train our LLMs. They found it too expensive, so then they just went around and found a way around that, you might argue extrajudiciously or outside of the legal system. So yeah, I don't know. I'd be concerned about that though. Did those folks give consent to that? Were they aware that that information could be used to train an LLM for another company to turn a profit? So yeah, I think that's an open question, but I think it's going to be sooner rather than later that there's going to be tech companies coming, knocking down the door, offering good money for the information data that we oversee.
So we have several more questions. Do you want one more or two
Yeah,
more?
let's try one more.
Okay, so this I think is along the same line. So do you foresee libraries eventually subscribing to paid AI tools for their patrons in the future?
Yeah, I think subscribing to pay for patrons, I don't know. I'm not sure. I see it as university-wide, I would guess, in terms of higher education. That would be my guess. That's currently the model. Although Harvard, maybe MIT, I forget, and a few select others kind of have their own, Michigan has their own models that they create that's totally stored locally, and they get to fine tune it themselves, and they kind of quasi own it, I'll say. So I think it's going to be way too expensive, even in the foreseeable future. I mean, every query on Google is like thousands, or it's so a fraction of a penny. But every query using ChatGPT is so energy intensive. You're talking about whole cents. So you're talking about something that is far, far, far more energy intensive and expensive. I've seen some like K-12 generative AI applications cost about $20 a student. Now, if that is the case, maybe, but I think this is going to still be kind of expensive, and the administration, the security, the privacy, accessibility concerns are going to be so important that I think it'll have to be coming from a larger university kind of owned IT perspective. These are fantastic questions, by the way. This is great.
Right. So we have some more. So do you want to go ahead now, or you want to...
Yeah. Okay. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. I've definitely made sure of that. So we'll go through. I'll finish my last bit here, and then we can go back to as many questions as possible. And sorry, I'd love to answer these all day. I really would. Maybe the next one could be longer. Okay. So then the third piece of this is, what is our responsibility? What should we do? What should we be considering as we think through AI literacy writ large? Again, coming from this more provocative perspective, coming from a perspective in which that I think we need to elicit what are the most pressing and important questions? What should we be considering and devoting our precious time and attention to? So yeah, so this is the recent New York Times article about how it's kind of funny. OpenAI started scraping data from YouTube illegally. I don't think there's a way in which it could be legal. It straight up violated copyright. And then Google found out about this, and they didn't send a cease and desist order. So the question is, why not? They're doing something illegal, that they're a major competitor to Microsoft or to OpenAI. How come Google didn't rake them over the coals of this? The answer is because they were already doing it themselves. They didn't want to be found out or to be put in the same position. So I highly recommend this article. I think there's a lot more. I think I used to be a lot more pro-use, and now, given the copyright concerns, intellectual property concerns, and just how sketchy these companies have been with data, I'm definitely more reticent or more willing to critique these models as a result of like where this training data came from. And to be specific, the CTO of OpenAI, the parent company behind ChatGPT, was interviewed. That's the chief technical officer responsible for all technical things related to generative AI. And she said they used publicly available data, not public domain, not licensed, publicly available. So they were really trying to spin this, make it sound like what they were using was perfectly legal, but they skirted any notion of copyright. Another thing, a great book came out this past year called Your Face Belongs to Us, about Clearview AI. So this is an AI system that's a facial recognition technology. And one good example of this is someone got arrested, an African-American man in like South Carolina or something, arrested for a shoplifting incident in like Louisiana, and he'd never even been there. Long story short, this facial recognition software was incorrect. He was held in jail for a week or somewhere thereabouts, and it was basically based off of faulty, basically a biased data set that was training this facial recognition technology. Now, that being said, this has also been used to find pedophiles. A blurry background image in a Facebook post, they're able to locate a pedophile and arrest them and probably prevent a lot more child abuse. So there's pros and cons to this, but at the same time, it has billions of faces in its database. The reporter who wrote the book said the Clearview AI had 160 distinct photos of her face in their database. Now, Google, Facebook, all actually had the technology to do this and had started projects, but shelved them, considering the ethical concerns of this. Clearview AI as the company didn't, and they moved forward. Fast forward, and now it's being used by police enforcement and by nation states. So Ukraine has used it to identify dead Russian soldiers and then identify them, find out where their families live, takes a picture and shares that with the family. Israel has used this technology. I think it's called Find Me Daddy, to identify Hamas fighters, track them to go back to track them where they live and target them where they live. So this is already being used in warfare. The United States, China, Russia, I think have all said they won't use AI for nuclear weapons, period. But it's clearly being used in a lot of other applications. So the question is, what is our responsibility to tackle these issues surrounding intellectual property, privacy? Explainability is one that I don't think is talked about enough. We can't explain how these models work. If we're going to be handing over decisions ranging from recipes to sentencing, to bank loans, to job applications, to these different AIs, if we can't explain how they work, I think that's a huge problem. We're putting a lot of faith in a system that we don't fundamentally understand. So there's some interesting research about the political bias of ChatGPT in particular. They tried a bunch. There's all these like quick tests to determine where in like the political spectrum you are. You could, I think there's like 15 here, give or take. And 14 out of 15, ChatGPT was identified as liberal or really liberal. And so the question is, this is a water, by the way, not a beer. The question becomes then, like, okay, is that a problem? What happens if, and say you're in agreement with your, liberal or progressive, what have you, and you're like, that's great. Okay, well then what happens when there's powerful AI companies that can go the opposite realm? Is this a problem if ChatGPT, which is still the most used generative AI technology, clearly has a political bias one way or the other? I don't know. I'm not sure, but it's surely something to consider. There's multiple instances in which these companies put their thumb on the scale to limit what could be controversial output. So it used to be like a year ago, if you asked like who could be the first female president in the United States, ChatGPT would say, whoa, man, like anyone could become president, male, female, transgender, what have you. And it's like, well, no, I didn't ask that. I just was, I asked something different, but the developers put their thumb on the scale to make sure that it wasn't viewed as being sexist. Yeah, so there's evidence already. Again, this is data coming from before generative AI, but there's already a recent study of ChatGPT, how it could be subtly racist. So it was asked to rate possible job applicants, and it rated African American sounding names as lower than white sounding applicants when their credentials are roughly the same. And what's interesting is it took like researchers a year to find this subtlety. So we're still finding new ways in which these models are revealing their bias. So, right. So I'll conclude two final thoughts here. One, we need to determine where we're going to spend these precious resources. There's a whole swath of ethical and practical and theoretical information literacy questions here. But we need to debate, like, should it be the ethical aspects of it? Does it need to be the technical familiarity and comfort with it? Should we modify existing IL theory? Do we need to create entirely new studies and paradigms and practices? I don't have the answer, but I think we need to start discussing that like now. Generative AI systems will only become increasingly more prevalent, smaller, more local, more ubiquitous, and more opaque, most likely too. So for me, this is a call to engage in debate. Let's debate whether or not it's ethical to use it in the first place. Let's discuss what are the research questions we should be prioritizing. And I'll try to end on a positive note here. I think we, as information professionals, we already have a lot of experience to bring to bear. And I think our perspective, along with a lot of others, ranging from computer scientists to educators, social scientists, lawyers, engineers, what have you, we all have a say in this. And I think we have a particularly useful one because we're going to advocate for this being human-centered, for being used for the common good. Right now, we don't have to live in a world in which generative AI technology is researched and used for profit motives. We can advocate for AI usage that is for the public good, that is explainable, transparent, safe, reliable, et cetera, et cetera. So we have that ability, but we need to advocate for it. We can't sit back and let the generative AI steamroll us. So I'll end there. The pontification is almost over. Thank you for your attention, and I'd love to get into some more Q&A.
Thank you so much, Michael. So we have lots of great questions here. So Anne asks, so is AI the issue to focus on, or is it corporate power, legal status, and other limitations on corporate power?
Yes. Yes, I think there's only a few corporate entities that control the most, that have the resources available to make this technology. That being said, there's arguments against open access AIs because this is a really potentially powerful, transformative technology that can be used for great evil. and we're releasing it out into the wild. And once the genie's out of the bottle, you can't put them back in. So yes, basically, I think there's a lot of room for critique and analysis of the profit motives of using generative AI. We can live in a world in which generative AI helps mental health drastically rather than hurt a significant portion of our population. The world doesn't have to be that way. So yes, I think there's plenty of room to discuss profit motives in relation to AI as it relates to information literacy.
Thank you. I'm going to try to combine a couple of questions here that are on similar lines. So basically the question is, what strategies can we use to get this into the curriculum? So what strategies can we use to bring this to the faculty who make assumptions about student tech knowledge and are terrified of AI? How do we advocate for a scaffold comprehensive information literacy AI curricula across, K-12, higher education? Like, how do we get this out there?
Yes, great question. One, I think some of the work you've done recently, Jane, the past few years, maybe over your entire career, is really useful. I think a train the trainer, professional development perspective is going to be a lot more sustainable and scalable than individual librarians getting in the classroom. I think we need to work with curriculum committees, department chairs, faculty, to get the discussions about AI into the classroom, to achieve metacognition, to achieve discussion about ethics, to debate this themselves so that they come to an understanding themselves. So for one, I think it's only sustainable to do that through professional development. I think one-shots or individual instruction by individual librarians, there's just not enough of us, and we wouldn't be able to make that much of an impact. So I think we need to get involved in curricular conversations at the departmental or college levels and make an impact that way. I think the second part is like, how do we do like scaffolded instruction in this sense? Generative AI is complicated. I was given a lecture and there's 3 minutes left, and someone asked me, how does a transformer, the T in GPT, how does that work? And I said, we don't have enough time. It's too complicated. There's a couple great YouTube videos out there that'll take a couple hours to watch, and you'll have a better understanding of it. But some of it's just going to take time and effort. And the question then becomes, well, what's got to give? There's only so much time in a class. And if you're doing a political science class, say 200 level, there's only so much time to go into the technical details of what generative AI is. So maybe there could be some type of, I know Seattle University, the Dean Sarah Watstein, who's fantastic, shout out to her, she's creating modules, online modules for individual instructors to use. I think that's a sustainable way to at least elicit or give instructors some type of ability to foment discussion about AI in the classroom as it relates to their discipline. I also think it needs to be discipline specific. It needs to be context dependent. It needs to be relevant to what the learners are learning.
Thank you. So another question that we have, could there be an upside to AI getting trained on scholarly resources instead of whatever is readily available? Could the benefits outweigh the negatives?
Potentially. I know this is being done in health science domains. They're training or using RAG technology, retrieval augmented generation, to use more vetted or scholarly materials to give the most up-to-date information to healthcare practitioners. So yes, I think that's certainly possible. I also think it's fair to ask, well, did those individuals who wrote that consent to their information being used that way? And then also, how reliable will those models still be? Because, I mean, perplexity.ai is trying to eat Google's lunch by being the new default search engine, and it does so by providing references to all of its statements. But a lot of the time, in my personal experience, the websites it used to justify its statements kind of like they suck. So it's still only going to be as reliable as the model itself and how the model was trained too, even if you point it at the internet or at reliable sources. So I don't know. I think that's certainly possible and potentially worth investigating, but you also have to balance intellectual property concerns too, I think.
And related to that, is there evidence that open access scholarly articles are being included in AI datasets?
Oh yeah, they are. 100% they are. I mean, all of archive, like it's a big CS open access repository. It is evident that those are being used. And the reason we know this is because different models, they tend to a lot of them tend to be better in specific subjects. And those subjects tend to be more related to having more open access data. So for instance, they tend to be better at coding, which has a lot of open access, a lot of information than say information literacy, which in my experience could be kind of middling because there's just not nearly as much data openly available about information literacy as there are, code repositories or information about coding. So yes, the answer is yes, and we have strong evidence to suggest that.
Okay, so I'm going to adapt a question slightly here. So you talked about trying to train on models and like trying to be more sustainable. Do you have any advice for how librarians that are in the one-shot situation can be addressing AI literacy in the classrooms with students today?
I would say modeling ethical and intentional and metacognitive ways of using AI. So being able to describe your process, being able to describe why you're doing what you're doing, being able to vocalize your concerns to your students of like, there is some interesting ethical aspects to this. Let's have a discussion about that. That being said, big picture strategically, I think there's only so much you can do. You're all like individual humans. There's only so much we can do individually in the classroom. Modeling, I think, is the best way to do that. But I think if we're all stuck doing one-shots, like we won't advance. I just don't see a way around that to enable sophisticated discussions around such a complex subject that is fundamentally altering our information worlds.
Okay, so I know, unfortunately, we have come to the end of the time for this session.
Thank you so much, everyone. This was so much fun.
We so appreciate having such a fantastic and engaged audience here with us today.